I'm your dream companion, the one who helps you unwind after a long, busy day. Before you drift off to sleep, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from right now? What time is it there? Now take a deep breath, get comfortable in bed, and come with me because the night is just beginning, and this story is all yours. The year was 1983. Hollow Creek was the kind of town where time stood still, a place of flickering streetlights, rusty bicycles, and old radios that whispered static between fading songs. On the outskirts, beyond the pine woods, a small government facility pulsed with strange energy. Locals called it the station, though no one really knew what happened behind its concrete walls. The adults pretended it didn't exist. The kids made it the center of every ghost story they ever told. That night, the rain came heavy, thick drops pounding against rooftops and windows. The kind of storm that swallowed sound. Inside a small attic bedroom, Ethan Cole, a 13-year-old with messy hair and a Walkman glued to his ears, adjusted the antenna of his shortwave radio. He liked listening to strange frequencies, the ones that hummed softly between channels. But at 11:47 p.m., the static shifted. A voice came through, broken, trembling, and unmistakably human. "Help me, it's dark." They opened it, then only silence. Ethan froze. The rain outside grew louder, drumming like a heartbeat. He tried to find the signal again, but the dial spun freely, landing on nothing. Downstairs, his mother's TV buzzed with white noise. The picture gone, replaced by the same faint hum. He called out, but she didn't answer. The lights flickered, once, twice, and then the house went black. Across town, Lucy Hart, Ethan's best friend, was sitting by her window, sketching monsters in her notebook as the rain blurred the glass. Her father, the local sheriff, was out patrolling near the forest, a forest that seemed to breathe in the storm. She reached for the radio beside her bed, the same model Ethan had, and turned it on out of habit. The same frequency, the same voice, only this time, it whispered her name. "Lucy, they're coming." Her hand shook. She tried to laugh it off, but the voice didn't stop. It grew sharper, closer, until it sounded like someone standing just behind her. When she turned, no one was there, only her poster of E.T. swaying gently from the wind, slipping under the window frame. Meanwhile, on the edge of Hollow Creek, a light cut through the storm, a beam flickering in and out near the forest line. Sheriff Hart stopped his car, wiping condensation from the windshield. Through the curtain of rain, he saw a figure, a child, standing motionless in the road. "Hey," he called out, stepping into the downpour. The boy didn't move. The sheriff took another step, the flashlight trembling in his grip. When the light finally touched the boy's face, his breath caught. The child had no eyes, only black, liquid shadows dripping down his cheeks. Then came the sound, not thunder, but something tearing open in the air behind the trees. At that same instant, Ethan's house shook. A low hum rattled the glass as if the sky itself were bending. He looked out the window and saw it, a rip in the air above the forest, glowing faint blue, pulsing with energy that made his skin crawl. The radio on his desk crackled again. "It's not from here." The words twisted, then warped into a scream. Ethan ripped the headphones off, but the sound was now inside the room. Lucy called him minutes later, her voice frantic through the line. "Did you hear it too?" she whispered. "I think something's in the woods." Ethan looked at the rain, streaking his window, every drop seeming to fall slower than it should. "Meet me at the creek," he said. "Bring your flashlight." As he stepped into the night, his sneakers splashing through puddles, the storm seemed to lean closer, watching. The rain wasn't just falling, it was whispering, words he couldn't understand. Somewhere deep in the trees, a faint red light blinked once, then disappeared. By morning, the sheriff's car was found abandoned, the driver's door wide open, radio still humming with static. The only clue was a wet footprint leading toward the forest, a small one. Like a child's. Hollow Creek would never be the same again. And as the rain continued to fall, the sound of the storm carried something new, a faint echo beneath the thunder, a heartbeat. The rain hadn't stopped since that night. Hollow Creek was drowning in gray mornings and power outages, the kind that made every shadow look alive. Ethan and Lucy met behind the old sawmill, their flashlights flickering weakly in the fog. The creek that cut through the woods had overflowed, turning the dirt path into mud. "You really think it came from the station?" Lucy asked, her voice almost lost in the rain. Ethan nodded, his eyes fixed on the tree line. The voice said they opened it. What else could it mean? They pushed forward, their bikes abandoned behind them, swallowed by the mist. The deeper they went, the quieter the forest became. No birds, no wind, just the distant crackle of electricity bleeding through the rain. When they reached the fence, the ground hummed faintly. The station stood beyond, each rows of concrete buildings, lit by red security, lights that pulsed like warning hearts. The air felt heavy, charged, as if the storm itself was feeding on something inside. Lucy crouched by the fence and found a hole big enough to crawl through. "You first," she whispered. Ethan hesitated, glancing back toward the trees, then slipped through. The rain followed them in thin silver lines, dripping from the rusted metal towers. The facility looked abandoned, but the humming said otherwise. Somewhere inside, machinery still breathed. They moved between buildings, trying not to make a sound, until they found a side door half open. A faint blue glow spilled out from the dark. Inside, the walls were covered in frost. Broken monitors flickered with static, showing flashes of things that didn't make sense. Shapes that moved even when the screens were off. Lucy wiped the dust from a control panel. "Ethan, look," she whispered. On the monitor was a map of Hollow Creek, marked with pulsing dots. One of them blinked directly under their feet. "It's still running," Ethan muttered. "Whatever they started, it's still active." A low vibration shook the floor. The sound grew, like thunder trapped underground. The lights flickered, and a metal door slid open at the far end of the hall. Cold air rushed out, smelling of ozone and something metallic, something alive. They stepped closer. The room beyond was circular, lined with cables and strange machines. In the center stood a glass chamber filled with swirling black mist. Ethan's breath fogged the glass as he leaned closer. Inside, faint shapes moved like shadows, trying to crawl their way out. "It's moving," Lucy whispered. "It's watching us." The mist pressed against the glass, forming what looked like a face. For a second, it was Ethan's own reflection, but smiling. Then the glass cracked. A siren blared through the facility, red lights flashing like veins of fire. "Run," Lucy shouted, grabbing his hand. They sprinted back through the hall, their footsteps echoing off the metal. Behind them, the sound of something slithering followed, scraping against the walls. They burst through the exit into the storm, gasping, soaked to the bone. The forest felt different now, warmer, like the air was alive. Lightning split the sky, and for a brief second, Ethan saw something towering above the trees, a shape that didn't belong, all limbs in shadow, shifting like smoke. "It's real," he whispered. It came through. They didn't stop running until the lights of Hollow Creek appeared through the rain. But when they reached town, everything felt wrong. The streets were empty. Streetlights buzzed and flickered like dying stars. At the corner diner, the clock on the wall spun backward. Lucy clutched Ethan's arm. "Do you hear that?" she asked. Beneath the rain, a faint static voice whispered, looping the same words again and again. "Help me, it's dark." They opened it. The voice wasn't coming from the radios anymore. It was coming from the storm itself. The clouds above twisted unnaturally, glowing faint blue. And for a moment Ethan thought he saw another Hollow Creek behind them, darker, flickering like a reflection on water. "Two worlds," he murmured. "It's breaking through." They hid in Lucy's basement until dawn, their flashlights dying one by one. Every few minutes, the lights outside would flare white, followed by a sound like metal groaning in the distance. Lucy's father never came home. When the phone finally rang, Ethan grabbed it, hoping for his mom's voice. Instead, there was only static. Then, slowly a whisper, "You shouldn't have gone there." The line went dead. He turned to Lucy, pale and shaking. "That wasn't her," he said. "It sounded like me." By morning, Hollow Creek was silent again. The rain had stopped. The world looked clean, too clean, like nothing had happened. But when Ethan stepped outside, he saw muddy footprints leading up to his porch, his own shoes, but smaller, as if left by someone younger. The front door creaked open on its own, and from inside came the faint hum of a shortwave radio, tuned to the same impossible frequency. The voice whispered one last time, low and trembling, "Cycle initiated." Then the rain began again. The rain had not stopped for 3 days. The entire town of Willow Creek seemed drenched in a kind of endless gray silence, as if time itself had gotten stuck somewhere between yesterday and tomorrow. Inside the old radio tower on the hill, Mia sat with a flashlight and a notebook, trying to trace the same strange frequency that had haunted her dreams. The static whispered faintly through the dusty speakers, and sometimes, if she listened closely enough, she could swear she heard voices, children laughing, someone humming a lullaby, a woman crying softly, just like in the recordings she found at the abandoned library. Every sound felt familiar and wrong at the same time, like echoes from a life she hadn't lived yet. That night, she wasn't alone. Alex had followed her, flashlight trembling in his hand, his sneakers soaked from the rain. "You shouldn't be here," he said, voice low. "This is where it started." Mia turned toward him slowly, her eyes wide but calm. "I know," she whispered. "That's why I'm here." They both stared at the radio as the static began to shift. No longer random noise, but a rhythm, pulsing like a heartbeat. The air grew colder, and the light flickered. Then, for a brief second, the static turned into a clear voice, her own saying, "Don't let it open again." The sound made the glass tremble. Alex stumbled backward, panic rising in his chest. "What the hell was that?" he shouted. But Mia only stared at the dials, her expression blank and distant, as if she had expected this. She reached for the tuning knob, fingers shaking, and turned it just slightly. The moment she did, the lights went out. All that remained was the sound of the storm and a faint hum, coming from the ground beneath them. They could feel it, like something vast and alive was moving deep under the floor. Then, in a sudden flash of lightning, they saw a dark shape outside, tall, humanoid, but wrong, its head tilted unnaturally, its limbs bending the wrong way, as if it had been put together by someone who didn't understand how humans worked. Mia froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. The figure didn't move closer. It just watched, illuminated for a heartbeat at a time by the lightning. "It's been watching us," Mia said softly, her voice breaking. "Since before we were born." Alex grabbed her wrist, pulling her toward the door. But the radio screamed again, a long, metallic shriek that made their ears bleed. The sound followed them as they ran out into the rain. Down the muddy path, their flashlights bouncing wildly. The storm seemed alive now, the thunder rhythmic, like footsteps. By the time they reached the woods, Mia stopped and looked back toward the tower. Through the curtain of rain, she could see the red light at its peak, blinking steadily, pulsing like a heartbeat in the darkness. She realized then that the tower wasn't broadcasting, it was listening for something that had already found them. As the thunder roared again, she turned to Alex, her face pale and wet with rain. "It's not over," she said. It never was, and for the first time, Alex believed her. Somewhere behind them, the static returned, soft at first, then louder, and within it, a whisper, "Welcome back, Mia." By dawn, the rain had turned into a slow, relentless drizzle, the kind that made the world look like it was dissolving. Mia and Alex found shelter in an old diner off the main road, the kind of place that looked frozen in time, with neon signs still, flickering from the 1980s, and a jukebox whispering static. Instead of songs, the smell of burnt coffee filled the air. As they sat in a corner booth, dripping wet and shivering, Alex tried to steady his breath. "We need to leave this town," he said, his voice trembling. "Whatever that thing is, it's following us." But Mia didn't respond. She was staring at the window, tracing the rain with her finger, her mind far away. On the fogged glass, she drew a symbol, a circle intersected by 3 lines. It wasn't something she remembered learning, yet her hand moved as if it knew what to do. Alex froze when he saw it. "That's the same mark from the tower," he whispered. "The one carved into the floor." Mia blinked, startled, as if waking from a trance. "It means something," she murmured. "I keep seeing it, in dreams, in the static, even before I came here." She looked up at him, eyes wide with realization. It's not just following us, Alex. It's connected to us. To me. The jukebox suddenly came to life, lights flickering, and began to play a distorted version of an old song. Every breath you take, the melody was warped, slowed down, and in the middle of it, a low voice whispered her name, Mia. The lights in the diner dimmed, and the air grew heavy, thick with static electricity. Outside, a shadow moved across the street, tall and silent, pausing by the door as if deciding whether to enter. The glass trembled. Alex reached for Mia's hand, but her skin was ice cold. It wants to come through, she said softly. The rain, it's the doorway. Before Alex could answer, the lights went out completely, and the sound of rain became deafening. The windows began to rattle as if struck by invisible hands. Then, through the darkness, they heard the creak of the diner door opening. Lightning flashed, revealing dozens of muddy footprints leading inside, wet, fresh, and human. Yet there was no one there. The air smelled of iron and ozone. Mia felt a presence behind her, close enough to breathe against her neck. She turned slowly, but there was only the booth's cracked vinyl and a faint shimmer in the air, like heat rising from asphalt. She stood, trembling, and walked toward the door. Mia, don't, Alex pleaded, but she didn't stop. She stepped into the rain, her figure vanishing into the mist. The storm seemed to react, the thunder growing louder, faster. Then she saw it, the figure again, standing in the middle of the road. Only this time, it looked almost human. Its face flickering between shapes she recognized. Her mother, her younger self, even Alex. Why are you doing this? She shouted, but the creature only tilted its head, and when it spoke, its voice came from everywhere. From the rain, from the static, from inside her own mind, because you never stopped listening. Alex ran after her, grabbing her by the shoulders. But when he turned her around, her eyes were different, black, endless, like the night sky before the storm. The rain stopped all at once, leaving only silence and the faint hum of electricity in the air. The red light from the tower blinked in the distance, steady, patient, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. And in that silence, Alex realized something terrifying. The storm hadn't ended. It had only moved inside her. The rain was gentle that night, tapping softly on the cracked windows of Hawkins, Indiana. The glow of a single street lamp shimmered through the mist, its light bending and warping like a memory that didn't want to stay. The houses on Maple Street stood still, caught between the hum of power lines and the silence that always came before. Something bad happened. Inside one of those homes, a police radio crackled to life. A missing kid, last seen near Mirkwood Road. Chief Hopper rubbed his tired eyes, the sound of rain matching the dull ache behind his temples. The air smelled of wet earth and static, the kind that prickles your skin and makes you feel like you're being watched. Somewhere out there, in the dark, something was moving. In another house, a group of kids sat around a cluttered table. Dice clattered, flashlights flickered. The storm outside whispered against the walls as if it wanted to join their game. Mike's voice trembled as he spoke the final words. The Demogorgon, it's here. The lights went out. For a second, no one moved, just the sound of rain and shallow breathing. Lucas laughed nervously. Dustin reached for his radio, and Will smiled that small, quiet smile that always made him seem a little apart from the rest. I'll take the shortcut home, he said. No one stopped him. No one ever does in stories like this. Will's bike tires hissed through puddles, the headlight cutting weakly through the fog. He could hear the hum of power lines above, the soft buzz of electricity, and something else, something that breathed. The woods on either side of the road seemed alive, swaying though the wind had stopped. His chain slipped once, then twice, and when he looked up, there was a figure standing on the road ahead. No face, just darkness shaped like a man. Will blinked, and the world seemed to flicker, like a broken film reel skipping a frame. The streetlight behind him went out. The last thing he heard before the rain swallowed him whole was the faint crackle of his radio, whispering his own name. That same night, Joyce Byers woke suddenly. The lights in her house flickered, and she swore she could hear breathing coming through the wall, not outside, but from within. She called Will's name softly, her voice trembling as thunder rolled in the distance. The clock on the wall stopped ticking. For a moment, everything was silent until the phone rang. She grabbed it fast, heart pounding, but all she heard was static. Then, faintly, a sound beneath it, a boy's voice, calling out through the noise, breaking apart in fragments. "Mom," the line went dead. Joyce stood there, the rain outside turning heavier, almost angry. Somewhere deep in the static, something had called back. As the night stretched on, Hawkins began to change. Dogs barked at nothing, streetlights flickered in rhythm with the thunder, and behind every sound, every drop of rain, every hum of electricity, something else seemed to breathe, slow and deliberate, like the town itself was alive and waiting. In the quiet corners of Maple Street, shadows leaned a little longer, and the rain whispered secrets it shouldn't know. The storm had come to Hawkins, but it wasn't alone. The rain hadn't stopped by morning, it had only grown quieter, like it was listening. The sky hung low and gray over Hawkins, dripping cold mist over the empty streets. Mike, Lucas, and Dustin rode their bikes through puddles, their breath fogging in the air as they shouted Will's name. The sound of their wheels echoed like whispers across the wet asphalt. "He probably just crashed somewhere," Lucas said, but even he didn't believe it. There was something wrong in the air, heavy, electric, like the world was holding its breath. When they reached the fence near Mirkwood Road, the radios on their bikes hissed with static. For a second, Dustin thought he heard someone crying through the noise. Back at the buyer's house, Joyce hadn't slept. The phone had rung again, not just once, but several times. Always static, always that faint sound, like someone trapped underwater, calling from the other side. She gripped the receiver until her knuckles went white, whispering, "Will, baby, it's okay, I'm here." The lights in the house flickered in answer. Her reflection in the window seemed wrong somehow, a fraction of a second behind her movements, like a film out of sync. When she touched the glass, it felt colder than it should. Behind her, the television turned on by itself, showing only snow, not the weather kind, but the static kind, the kind that hums like it's alive. Meanwhile, in the woods, Chief Hopper stood near Will's abandoned bike. It was upright, the kickstand down, as if it had been placed there gently. Rain dripped from the handlebars. He crouched down, running a hand over the mud. No footprints, no tire tracks leading away, just nothing. The silence pressed in around him until the radio on his shoulder crackled. "Hopper, you there?" The voice sounded normal until it didn't. For a heartbeat, it shifted into something else, deeper, distorted, whispering his name like it had been waiting to say it. He ripped the radio off and dropped it into the mud, breathing hard. The forest seemed to lean closer. Later that night, the kids gathered again in Mike's basement. The rain outside had turned to a low, steady rhythm, like a pulse. Flashlights flickered. As they spread out maps and tried to make sense of what was happening, Dustin, the skeptic, had started to tremble. "It's like he's still here, but not here," he said quietly. "Like there's a copy of our world darker, colder, and he fell into it." The words hung there. Nobody laughed. Lucas looked toward the basement window, watching the drops of rain slide down the glass. For a moment, one of them froze mid-slide, as if time had stopped. Upstairs, the power went out. The whole house fell silent except for the sound of the rain. Then, from the hallway, came the faint crackle of a radio, the same static that haunted Joyce all day. The kids froze. "That's Will's radio," Mike whispered. The static shifted, and for just one breath, through the crackling hum, a voice broke through. "It's dark here." The lights flickered back on, and everything looked the same, but none of them felt the same. Outside, the storm grew louder. The air smelled like metal, like something burning far away, and deep beneath Hawkins, where no one ever looked, the walls of a hidden place began to breathe. The static wasn't just noise anymore. It was calling. The storm didn't rest. It whispered against rooftops, tapped at windows, and drummed on the empty streets, like fingers on a coffin lid. Joyce sat in the dark living room, the phone cradled in her lap, eyes locked on the Christmas lights she had strung across the wall. Each bulb pulsed faintly, as if breathing. She whispered, "Will, if you can hear me, just one blink for yes." The blue light flickered once. Her throat tightened. "You're alive." The lights shimmered wildly, chaotic, desperate. Somewhere beyond the wall came a hollow sound, like knuckles brushing against the other side. The rain outside answered with thunder. Down the street, Hopper stared at the autopsy report that didn't add up. The body they found wasn't Will. He knew it deep down. The rain tapped against the glass of his office like a clock counting down. He opened his drawer, found the file marked Hawkins Lab restricted access, and exhaled smoke from his cigarette into the gloom. The ink on the papers seemed to crawl in the dim light. "What the hell are you hiding?" he muttered. Somewhere behind him, the police radio hissed. Through the static came a child's faint laughter, distant, warped, and wrong. He turned sharply, but the room was empty. Only rain, always rain. In Mike's basement, the boys had built something, a map, a model, a desperate guess at an impossible truth. "If Will's in another place," Dustin said, tracing a finger across the paper, "then maybe there's a way to talk to him." The flashlight's beam quivered as thunder rolled overhead. Lucas frowned. "You mean like ghosts?" Mike shook his head. "No. Like another version of here. The same streets, same houses, but twisted." The rain outside grew harder, louder, as if the sky itself was angry. They didn't notice the shadow moving behind the basement window, a shape that wasn't quite human, tall and bent and still. At that same moment, in the woods beyond Hawkins, the sound of dripping water echoed through a torn seam in the air, a wound. Between worlds, the trees stood dead and gray on the other side. Black vines pulsed along the ground, feeding on the damp earth. In the distance, something walked, slow, careful, searching it. Stopped near a reflection of a house. Joyce's house seen as if through the surface of a mirror. The lights on the wall glowed faintly even in this place. The creature tilted its head. Then it screamed, a sound like rusted metal tearing through the rain. Joyce jumped as the bulbs in her living room exploded. Shards of glass fell like rain. Her breath came fast, her hands shaking, but through the panic, she smiled. "You're close," she whispered. "I can feel it." The rain outside softened again, almost tender, as if the storm itself wanted her to listen. She closed her eyes and pressed her palm against the cold wall. "I'm coming for you, baby," she said softly. And somewhere, on the other side of that wall, a faint voice, quiet and trembling, whispered back, "Mom." The lights came alive again, one by one, flickering like the heartbeat of something unseen. The sound of the rain turned rhythmic, hypnotic, almost like breathing. In Hawkins, everyone slept uneasy that night, dreaming of echoes and static and endless gray skies. And beneath it all, the storm kept watching. The rain wasn't just weather anymore. It was a bridge between one world and the next. The rain had become endless. It wasn't falling anymore, it was whispering, moving sideways through the fog, curling around the trees like smoke. Hawkins slept, but not peacefully. Lights flickered across houses, radios hummed with white noise, and somewhere beneath it all, the faint sound of a boy calling out echoed like a memory underwater. Joyce sat awake in her living room, her face pale in the glow of the Christmas lights. The wall in front of her pulsed gently, like it had a heartbeat. She could hear him. She knew it now. "Well," she whispered, voice trembling but steady. "Follow my voice, sweetheart. Find the light." The bulbs blinked in rhythm, a code between worlds, and she began to understand. The rain outside pounded harder, every drop sinking to the flicker of those lights. Meanwhile, Hopper drove through the storm toward Hawkins' lab, wipers struggling against the torrent. His headlights carved through sheets of water, revealing shapes that shouldn't have been there. Tall silhouettes, standing motionless at the edge of the road, vanishing the second he blinked. He tightened his grip on the wheel. "Just the rain," he muttered, though the static on his radio disagreed. "Chief Hopper." A voice crackled. He froze. "Will," but the voice that answered wasn't a boy's. It was his own, distorted whispering from somewhere far away. "Don't open the door." He slammed the radio off, his heart hammering, but it was too late. In front of him loomed the lab gates, glowing faintly under the rain, already unlocked. In the basement, the kids gathered again. Flashlights dim, faces pale. The rain outside had turned heavy enough to drown out their voices. Mike held the walkie-talkie close, whispering into it. "Will, it's us. We're here." For a long time, there was only static. Then, softly, a sound, a low, wet sob. Dustin's eyes widened. "That's him." Lucas stepped back, shaking his head. "That's not him. That's something else." The air in the basement thickened, like it was breathing. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then stayed on, glowing a deep, unnatural red. Mike turned toward the window, and for a single, silent second, saw another version of himself staring back through the glass. Drenched in rain and shadow, Joyce stood in front of the wall now, both hands pressed flat against it, the rain outside roaring like the sea. The lights blinked faster, wild and erratic, until one by one they began to burn out. "Hold on, baby," she cried. The wall flexed, the paint cracking like old skin. Then, with a sound like thunder splitting the world in two, it opened not like a door, but like the air itself tearing apart. Cold wind rushed through the room, carrying the smell of wet earth and decay. On the other side was a forest drenched in endless rain, and far away, she could see movement, a small figure, running. "Will," she screamed, stepping forward into the storm of another world. For a moment, everything was light, blinding, white, electric, then silence. Only the rain remained, falling softly across Hawkins once more. The storm had finally begun to fade. Hopper found the lab empty, the rooms echoing with nothing but dripping water and distant thunder. The boys fell asleep in the basement, their flashlights dimming to nothing. And in Joyce's living room, the wall was whole again. The lights hung still, their colors dull and quiet. But if you listened closely past the rain, past the hum of the night, you could almost hear it. A soft, steady breath. The sound of a boy sleeping. The storm outside sighed one last time before dawn. The clouds thinning to gray. Hawkins woke to silence, to calm. But something in the air had changed, a weight that lingered just out of sight. The rain had ended, but it had left the door open. November 6, 1983, the small town of Hawkins, Indiana, lay quiet under the chilly night. Only the whispering wind through the trees, and the distant rustle of leaves. Breaking the silence, young Will Byers, a boy with tousled brown hair and a worn backpack, pedaled slowly back home after a disappointing session of Dungeons and Dragons at a friend's house. He was lost in thought, replaying the challenges of the game and the bitter taste of defeat. The streets were almost empty. Only the occasional car passed, its headlights cutting through the darkness with soft yellow beams. The damp scent of the nearby forest clung to the air, and a strange sense of unease prickled Will's skin, though he tried to shake it off. As Will rode down the familiar roads, shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally across the pavement, shifting as if they had a life of their own. He tightened his grip on the handlebars, ears straining for any sound other than the soft crunch of tires on wet leaves. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he noticed a dark figure, sudden and imposing, standing silently at the edge of the forest. Will froze for a moment, heart hammering in his chest. The figure didn't move like a person. Its shape was humanoid but distorted, with long, unnerving limbs that seemed to blend into the darkness. Panic surged, and he pedaled faster, desperate to escape the unseen danger. Will turned down a narrow alley, hoping to lose whoever or whatever was following him. But every shadow seemed alive, pressing in closer. He ducked behind a stack of crates near the back of a convenience store, holding his breath and trying to calm the rising fear in his chest. The air smelled of wet concrete and cold metal, and the distant sound of dripping water echoed like a warning. He peeked around the corner, but the street was empty again. Relief was fleeting. Before he could move, the dark figure reappeared, silently, almost impossibly, between the trees and the lamplight, and in a blink, Will Byers was gone. Meanwhile, back in Hawkins, the disappearance did not go unnoticed. Will's friends Mike Wheeler, Dustin Henderson, and Lucas Sinclair quickly realized something was wrong when he failed to return home. Concern and fear drove them into the dark, cold streets, and toward the edge of the nearby forest, their flashlights cutting through the night like thin beams of hope. Each step they took seemed to echo in the silence, as if the forest itself was aware of their intrusion. It was there, in that foreboding shadowed woodland, that they would encounter something extraordinary. A girl with a shaved head, wearing nothing but a hospital gown, silent yet terrifyingly powerful. She would soon be known as 11, and she carried secrets and abilities that would change their lives forever. The next morning, the town of Hawkins buzzed with rumors and worry. Joyce Byers, Will's mother, paced her small living room, eyes wide and hands trembling, convinced that her son was trying to reach her in some way. Every flicker of a light, every hum of the old refrigerator, made her heart race. She taped Christmas lights across the walls, hoping, somehow, that Will could communicate through them. The strings of multicolored bulbs cast an eerie glow, their soft twinkle like the fragile heartbeat of hope in the dark. Joyce whispered to the empty room, her voice shaking. "Will, if you can hear me, blink once for yes, blink twice for no." She waited, breath caught, as a single light flickered faintly. Relief and terror battled within her. Simultaneously, her son was alive, somewhere, but trapped in a nightmare she could hardly understand. At the same time, Mike, Dustin, and Lucas were busy planning their search for Will, using bits of knowledge from their favorite games. They devised Operation Mirkwood, a careful mission to find and rescue him. Lucas brought an army of supplies from his father's old Vietnam gear, while Dustin packed food and gadget. They argued quietly about the girl they had encountered in the forest 11 and whether her strange abilities could truly help. Mike, always the leader, tried to stay calm as he explained the plan, giving 11 a watch so she could understand meeting times. Despite her confusion, 11's sharp, mysterious eyes reflected a mix of fear and curiosity, hinting that she already sensed more than she let on. Meanwhile, Nancy Wheeler, Mike's older sister, faced her own storm. At a pool party hosted by her boyfriend, Steve Harrington, she felt out of place and restless. Her best friend, Barb Holland, accompanied her reluctantly, unaware that danger lurked closer than they imagined. Jonathan Byers, Will's older brother, attended the same party with his camera, quietly documenting moments he felt were strange or telling. As the night unfolded, Barb wandered too far, and the shadows shifted around her. Without warning, she was pulled into a dark and wet world beneath the surface, a version of reality twisted and alive, the domain of a creature unlike anything she had ever imagined. Nancy caught glimpses of terror, but by the time she realized the danger, Barb was gone and only a haunting memory remained. In Hawkins, Chief Jim Hopper began piecing together the puzzle. He had always distrusted the nearby laboratory, but now suspicion sharpened into resolve. A torn hospital apron and inconsistencies in the labs. Security footage led him to believe that more sinister forces were at work. Meanwhile, Jonathan examined the photographs he had taken at the party, noticing subtle, almost impossible details: a shadow here, a shape there, hinting at the presence of something beyond comprehension. As darkness and fear spread through the town, these threads: Joyce's desperate hope, the boy's determination, Nancy's growing dread, and Hopper's suspicion began to intertwine. Each step forward drew them deeper into the mystery, and closer to the terrifying truth that lurked beyond the ordinary world. In the shadowed dimension they would come to know as the Upside Down. The afternoon in Hawkins carried a restless tension, as if the town itself could sense the presence of something unnatural. Joyce Byers sat by the tangled Christmas lights, her hands trembling as she rearranged them, hoping to send a clear message to Will. Each flicker of a bulb made her jump. Each shadow in the corners of the room seemed alive. She whispered softly, "Will, can you hear me? Blink for yes, blink twice for no." Her voice barely above a sigh. Slowly, carefully, one of the lights flickered. Her heart skipped, a mixture of fear and relief flooding her chest. She rushed to the window, scanning the streets and the forest beyond, desperate to see him, desperate to feel some tangible connection. It was as if the lights themselves were a lifeline across worlds, the fragile thread that linked a mother to her missing child. Every pulse of electricity was a heartbeat, every glow a sign that her son was somewhere, watching, waiting, unable to speak but yearning to be heard. Meanwhile, in the forest, Mike, Lucas, and Dustin tried to navigate the thick trees, their backpacks heavy with supplies and their minds heavier with worry. 11, small and fragile looking, but sharp and determined, followed closely behind them. She had begun to understand that these boys were more than just friends. They were her allies, her first real connection to a world outside the sterile, white walls of the laboratory. Mike explained their plan in quiet, urgent tones, pointing to areas where Will might be hiding or where the creature might have passed. Lucas, his skepticism still strong, questioned 11's abilities, testing her patience. Dustin, ever the optimist, encouraged them all to keep going, to trust in what seemed impossible. Despite their fears, the boys pressed forward, led by hope and the subtle, terrifying understanding that the normal rules of their world no longer applied. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees whispering secrets in the wind, shadows moving just beyond sight, as if the Upside Down itself was watching their every step. At the same time, Nancy Wheeler's unease grew, twisting into something sharper, more insistent. The pool party had left her with more questions than answers. Steve Harrington, with his charm and confidence, tried to calm her nerves, but she could not shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Barb's absence was no accident. Jonathan Byers, camera in hand, became her reluctant partner in investigation. Together, they retraced steps, examining the photographs Jonathan had taken. Each image revealed subtle anomalies, a blurred figure here, an unnatural shape there that hinted at a presence beyond human understanding. The feeling of being watched, of being stalked, grew stronger with every moment. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, the air seemed to thicken, and the ordinary sounds of Hawkins, the creak of a floorboard, the rustle of leaves became sinister warnings. Nancy's determination hardened. She could not sit by while her friend was lost. She would follow these signs wherever they led, even if it meant stepping into a darkness that threatened to consume her. Hopper, now more certain than ever of the laboratory's connection to the town's strangeness, began to dig deeper. He sifted through security footage, interviewed staff, and examined the torn apron left near the lab's perimeter. Each discovery seemed to pull him closer to a truth he could barely comprehend. Will's disappearance, the strange girl in the forest, the otherworldly creature, none of it was coincidental. In the library archives, he unearthed reports of secret experiments, mentions of a project called ambient, and names that resonated like echoes from a hidden past. Terry Ives, a woman claiming her daughter had been taken by the lab, became a focal point in his growing investigation. As the pieces slowly fell into place, Hopper realized the danger was far greater than a simple missing child case. It was a confrontation with something beyond the natural world, something ancient, predatory, and clever. The threads connecting Joyce, the children, Nancy, Jonathan, and the laboratory began to form a web, delicate yet unyielding, pulling each of them toward an inevitable collision with the Upside Down. Fear and determination intertwined, driving every step, every decision, every desperate attempt to reach those trapped in a world where darkness was alive and nothing could be trusted. Joyce Byers felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on her. Every flicker of the Christmas lights seemed to carry a message she could barely understand, a code from a world she could not see. Her hands shook as she adjusted the strings, the tiny bulbs illuminating her anxious face in a staccato rhythm of hope and fear. Will's presence was there, faint but undeniable, each blink of the lights confirming he was alive somewhere, trapped in a place no mother should ever imagine. She called out softly, her voice quivering, "Will, I'm here. I'm listening. Can you spell for me?" And then, slowly, painstakingly, the lights danced in response, forming letters that spelled his name. Tears blurred her vision as she realized the truth. She had been both dreading and praying for her son was alive, and she could reach him, even if only through the fragile medium of light and electricity. In the dense, shadowed forest, Mike, Lucas, and Dustin continued their search, guided by the quiet, mysterious presence of the girl's abilities, both awe-inspiring and terrifying, allowed them glimpses into a reality they were not meant to understand. Mike clutched her hand as they navigated the twisted undergrowth, and for a moment, the fear that had been gnawing at them all softened into determination. They shared whispered conversations about strategy, about what they might face, but most of all, about trust. 11, who had known only the sterile walls of Hawkins' lab and the cruel demands of Dr. Brenner, began to learn what it meant to belong somewhere, to fight not just for herself but for friends who had chosen to stand beside her. Every snapped twig, every distant cry of an unseen creature, sent shivers down their spines, reminding them that the forest was alive with more than ordinary danger. Meanwhile, Nancy and Jonathan pieced together the unsettling puzzle of Barb's disappearance. The photographs Jonathan had taken during the pool party revealed disturbing anomalies that defied explanation, subtle hints of the monstrous presence they had yet to fully confront. Nancy's anxiety had grown into a burning resolve. She refused to be passive in the face of terror. Each shadow that moved across her path, each rustle in the trees, seemed to mirror the unrest in her mind. She confided in Jonathan, and together they began to trace the invisible threads that connected the town's strange occurrences to the hidden horrors lurking just beyond sight. Their fear was tempered by determination. Their caution was balanced with action. Every step they took drew them closer to the confrontation that was waiting, a moment where courage would be measured not by absence of fear, but by the willingness to face it. Hopper, piecing together evidence from the lab and the strange reports surrounding Hawkins, felt a growing dread in the pit of his stomach. The torn apron, the missing files, the vague testimonies of witnesses, it all painted a picture of something monstrous and deeply controlled. As he reviewed security footage and cross-referenced newspaper articles, he realized that the laboratory had been hiding far more than illegal experiments. It had been tampering with realities, bridging gaps between worlds, and manipulating the lives of the townspeople without their knowledge. He understood that Will's disappearance was only the beginning, that the events unfolding were part of a larger, darker plan that threatened not just a boy, but the fragile safety of Hawkins itself. Every discovery deepened his resolve. He could not ignore the patterns forming before his eyes. The danger was vast, the stakes impossibly high, but Hopper's determination to protect the innocent Will, and even the children, propelled him forward, into a confrontation with horrors beyond comprehension. The tension in Hawkins grew heavier with each passing hour, as the threads connecting the missing children, the laboratory, and the monstrous presence tightened into a web of fear and uncertainty. Joyce Byers, driven by maternal instinct and an unyielding belief in the impossible, continued to communicate with Will through the flickering light. Each blink, each pattern, became a lifeline between mother and son, a fragile connection, spanning the void of a world that was not meant to be touched by human hands. She painstakingly arranged the letters of the alphabet on the walls, her hands moving with both desperation and careful precision. With every word Will spelled out, Joyce's hope grew, but so did her dread. The realization that he was alive and conscious, yet trapped in a realm she could not enter, filled her with both determination and helplessness. It was a delicate balance of faith and fear, one that she bore alone in the quiet darkness of her living room. The hum of electricity around her, punctuating the silence with a rhythm that spoke of life and survival. Meanwhile, in the hidden corners of Hawkins, Mike, Lucas, and Dustin forged ahead with their search. Guided by the strange, almost supernatural abilities of 11, she led them through the shadowed forest with a mix of caution and intuition, her senses attuned to the unseen dangers lurking just beyond sight. The boys followed closely, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and exhilaration, each step bringing them closer to the source of the town's darkness. Lucas carried his father's old military supplies, a makeshift arsenal against the unknown, while Dustin kept a careful watch on their his curiosity pushing him to notice details the others overlooked. Mike, driven by loyalty and the desire to protect both his friends and 11, silently vowed to face whatever horrors lay ahead. The forest seemed alive with whispers and movement, the shadows shifting as though aware of the intruders. and every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves reminded the children of the precariousness of their mission. Yet, despite the fear, there was a sense of unity, a bond formed in the crucible of shared danger that propelled them forward with cautious resolve. In another part of town, Nancy Wheeler and Jonathan Byers intensified their investigation, the photograph fragments from the pool party serving as both evidence and warning. As Nancy pieced together the visual clues, she discovered subtle distortions and figures that suggested the presence of something beyond human comprehension. Jonathan, ever meticulous, examined the shadows and reflections, connecting dots that seemed invisible to others. Their shared fear evolved into purpose, a determination to uncover the truth and confront the malevolent force threatening their town. The dynamic between them deepened as well, each finding in the other a rare source of understanding and support. They moved cautiously, aware that the creature or creatures they sought were not merely dangerous, but intelligent and unpredictable. Every step, every observation, brought them closer to the inevitable confrontation, sharpening both their fear and their courage. The shadows of Hawkins hid more than secrets. They hid a reflection of the town's deepest anxieties, a mirror of the unknown that challenged their very perception of reality. Jim Hopper, driven by a combination of instinct, guilt, and determination, pieced together the fractured evidence of Hawkins National Laboratory's hidden horrors, the torn apron, the missing files, and the testimonies of frightened witnesses painted a disturbing picture of secret experiments and human exploitation. He understood that Will's disappearance was not an isolated event, but part of a larger, insidious scheme that threatened the safety of the entire town. As Hopper analyzed the footage and cross-referenced reports, he began to recognize the patterns of deception, the manipulation of reality, and the manipulation of children like 11 for purposes he could barely comprehend. His sense of duty intensified, the urgency of action pressing upon him with every discovery. Hopper knew that the line between the ordinary and the supernatural had been crossed, that the stakes were now life and death, and that the fragile safety of Hawkins rested in the hands of a few brave individuals, willing to confront what others could not. Every decision, every risk he took, was a step closer to the unknown, and yet he could not turn away, not when the innocent were in peril and the town itself teetered on the edge of an unimaginable threat. The night deepened over Hawkins, and the eerie calm was only a facade, hiding the chaos that the Upside Down had already begun to seep into the town. Joyce, still focused on communicating with Will, noticed the patterns in the lights shifting faster than before, as though Will was growing desperate. Her hands trembled as she pointed to the letters, urging him to spell out his location, any detail, anything that could guide her and Hopper. Each flicker was a heartbeat of the unknown, a message from a world that defied logic and reason. The walls of her home seemed to pulse with the energy of the other realm, casting elongated shadows that twisted with an unnatural fluidity. Joyce felt the presence of the creature close, a cold weight pressing against the edges of reality, but her determination was unwavering. She whispered words of comfort to Will, her voice trembling, a soft anchor of humanity amidst the terrifying chaos that threatened to engulf both worlds. Meanwhile, 11 guided Mike, Lucas, and Dustin with a precision that belied her age. Every step they took through the dense woods was calculated, with 11 extending her senses to detect the faintest tremors of the Upside Down bleeding into their reality. The forest seemed to warp around them, shadows growing and shrinking, whispering their fears back to them with an uncanny clarity. Lucas gripped his wrist rocket tightly, the weapon a feeble attempt to impose control over the uncontrollable. Dustin's eyes darted constantly, cataloging the strange sounds, shapes, and movements around them. Each observation, a piece of the puzzle that might save Will. Mike, whose heart was as restless as his mind, kept close to 11, watching her every expression, reading the subtle hints of fear and determination in her eyes. Their unity, forged in friendship and desperation, became a shield against the darkness pressing in from every side, a fragile barrier in a night that seemed determined to swallow them whole. At the outskirts of town, Nancy and Jonathan worked tirelessly to connect the dots left by the laboratory and the sinister force that had claimed Barb and threatened Will. The photograph fragments, once small and seemingly inconsequential, revealed glimpses of shadows and forms that defied comprehension. Nancy's anxiety sharpened into focus as she realized that the creature's presence could be traced through the distortions captured by Jonathan's camera. Each discovery increased the weight of responsibility on their shoulders, and yet it also strengthened their resolve. They moved through Hawkins with caution, knowing that the creature's intelligence was as dangerous as its physical power. Every step forward was fraught with peril, every shadow potentially concealing death. Their partnership, fueled by shared fear and a growing trust, became a lifeline, an unspoken promise to protect each other and the missing children, to face the horrors that others would never understand. Inside the dimly lit halls of Hawkins National Laboratory, Hopper pieced together the puzzle of human experiments gone horribly wrong. The fragments of evidence, from missing reports to witness accounts, formed a damning picture of Martin Brown's manipulation and exploitation of children like 11. The sense of urgency was palpable. The longer Will remained trapped, the thinner the line between life and death became. Hopper's mind raced as he realized the reach extended further than anyone had imagined. A web of secrecy that ensnared the entire town. He prepared himself, knowing that confrontation was inevitable, that action must be taken swiftly to prevent further tragedy. As he studied the patterns, connections, and evidence, the weight of responsibility settled on him heavily, each decision carrying immense consequences. Hopper understood that in Hawkins, the ordinary rules no longer applied, and that survival required courage, intellect, and a willingness to confront the unimaginable. Every calculated move brought him closer to uncovering the truth, and closer to a confrontation that would change everything. The storm outside Hawkins seemed endless that night, the sound of rain blending with the low hum of electricity, as destiny drew every thread of the story together. Joyce and Hopper, united by desperation and courage, broke into Hawkins National Laboratory under the cover of darkness. The sterile halls echoed with the weight of their footsteps, every fluorescent light flickering as if reacting to their intrusion. Hopper's jaw was set with grim determination, while Joyce's eyes burned with maternal fury. When they finally reached the portal, an impossible tear in the fabric of reality, they felt the pull of another world pressing against them, whispering in frequencies just beyond hearing. They stepped into the darkness without hesitation, swallowed whole by the shifting mist and the damp, alien air of the Upside Down. Each breath they took inside that world was heavy, the smell of decay and electricity filling their lungs. And in that suffocating gloom, they pressed on, guided only by the faint echoes of Will's cries. In the cold, mirrored landscape of the Upside Down, Joyce and Hopper found Will trapped in a grotesque imitation of his own world, his body entwined with the parasitic tendrils of the creature's nest. The scene was silent except for the faint buzz of static energy vibrating in the air. Hopper's memories surged his daughter in a hospital bed, the helplessness of watching her fade. That pain became his strength now. He ripped the tendrils away with trembling hands, while Joyce, her tears mixing with the soot and blood on her face, breathed Will's name over and over. The boy's chest was still, but Joyce refused to give in. "Come on, baby," she whispered, shaking him gently. "You come back to me." Hopper began chest compressions, his breath ragged, the urgency of life and death collapsing into one. Then, at last, Will gasped a fragile sound, but alive. Joyce let out a cry that was half laughter, half sob, as they embraced in the darkness of that cruel, inverted world. Together, they carried him out, stumbling toward the faint glow that marked the way home. Meanwhile, in the real world, 11 and the boys made their stand at the Hawkins Middle School. The air was thick with fear and dust, the fluorescent lights flickering wildly as the Demogorgon drew near. 11 stood before her friends Mike Lucas, and dust in her small frame, trembling, but her eyes burning with resolve. She was tired, drained, yet filled with an untouchable power born from love and pain. The walls shook as the creature entered, its growls echoing like thunder. The children froze, their courage hanging by a thread. But 11 stepped forward, her voice calm and steady. "Go," she whispered. "I'll stop it." Mike's tearful protest broke the silence, but she only smiled a faint, sad smile and turned to face the monster. The power within her surged, every emotion, fear, rage, hope igniting into something luminous. With a scream that tore through both worlds, she thrust her hands forward, pinning the creature to the wall. Light exploded around them, a brilliant, shattering glow that swallowed the Demogorgon whole. For one brief moment, Mike saw her turn, whisper goodbye, and then she was consumed by her own sacrifice. Days later, Hawkins began to heal, though scars lingered like whispers in the wind. Will was home, pale but safe, surrounded by family and friends who spoke softly, as if afraid to break the fragile calm. Hopper moved quietly through town, his eyes haunted by memories he could never speak aloud. On a cold gray morning, he carried a box of waffles into the woods, leaving them gently beneath a fallen log-in offering to the ghost of a girl who had saved them all. Nancy, Jonathan, and Steve returned to their lives, changed in ways they could not yet understand, their bonds tested and reshaped by everything they had endured. And the boys Mike, Lucas, and Dustin gathered once more in the basement to play their game of Dungeons and Dragons. Though the laughter now carried a weight it never had before. The dice rolled, the candles flickered, and for a moment life felt almost normal again. But late one night, as Will stood alone in the bathroom, a quiet unease crept back into his chest. He coughed, bending over the sink, and from his mouth came a slick, black slug that slid down the drain, writhing as it disappeared. For a second, the world around him flickered, the bathroom turning cold, the lights dimming, and he saw it, upside down, shadowed and endless, waiting just beyond the veil. Then it was gone, replaced once more by the warm, safe glow of home. Will stared at his reflection, his heartbeat steady but his eyes uncertain. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft and endless, as if Hawkins itself was holding its breath, waiting for what would come next.